What's the real job of an FBI profiler like? What's it like to be a detective or a federal prosecutor, or to make it your mission to catch the serial killer who killed your cousin? What's it like to be the father of a missing and murdered Indigenous woman? At the Silver Linings Handbook podcast, we explore conversations that inspire with people from all walks of life. I'm Jason Blair, the host. Come join us for these interesting conversations wherever you get your podcasts.
This week, we're putting the final stamp on the story of John Dillinger with a discussion. I invited Kevin and Aine from the Murder Sheet podcast to speak with me about the myths, loose ends, and other items of interest that didn't make it into the 4-part series, including the big one. Was John Dillinger really the one who died that day? Find out about all that and more on this episode of Vintage Villains. Well, hello, everybody. I am Allison Dickson, and welcome to Vintage Villains. So Kevin and Aine are absolute rock stars in the podcasting world. They're wicked smart, meticulous, thorough, and principled. Everything you could want out of a true crime show, especially. For the last couple years, their main area of focus has been on the murder case out of Delphi, Indiana, involving Abby Williams and Liberty German. Their accused killer, Richard Allen, is beginning trial in the second week of October, and Murder Sheet will be there for all of it, providing as much info as they can on the proceedings. They also have recently announced a book they have written on the case that is due out in 2025. I'll have a pre-order link in the show notes if you are interested in picking that up. So I am doubly grateful that they took the time out of their very busy schedules recently to talk about John Dillinger with me, because it turns out they also have a lot of knowledge on the topic of Depression-era gangsters and are major history buffs. Also, as residents of the Hoosier State themselves, they're bringing some of their regional knowledge to the table on this case. I pre-recorded this interview in early October, so we're just going to go ahead and jump into it now. Enjoy. First, I guess I should ask, when it comes to historical true crime, do you have a favorite time period? And what did you like about the Dillinger case? What kind of brought you into that?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question, Allison. And thanks for that lovely introduction. We really love your show too, and we appreciate your mutual obsession with the historical mysteries, because I think those ones can be pretty fun. In terms of time period for me, I talk about this. I let this leak out sometimes on our show, but I'm a huge Jamestown nerd, actually. So my obsession is specifically, it gets really weird. It gets specific. Jamestown 1607. Wow. Maybe a little bit into 1609, but let's be real. 1607 is where it's at. There are some mysteries associated with that, but let's go into crime. I am going to give a super boring answer, and it's just that I really just appreciate historical mysteries and crimes in general. We did a live show in Kendallville, Indiana recently, and we basically pulled all these older crimes for them, and you were able to piece together, here's when the railroad came into town. Here's where AT&T set up the phone lines. Oh, there was interesting kind of tensions with the local Italian immigrants, and it led to some violence between the kind of town people and the people coming in as immigrants. And you can really just learn so much about a community and time period from learning about their crime. That being said, there is something very, very intriguing, very interesting about the, I'd say 20s to 30s in the United States, where you do have these folks like Dillinger going around causing chaos and getting such attention. I love that kind of Thin Man era, I guess, just aesthetically, and it's just kind of very fun to learn about. So Dillinger, for me, I'm not from Indiana originally, but I'm very into being in Indiana, very into being a Hoosier now. And so having John Dillinger be one of sort of the premier bank robbers is sort of a dubious honor for Indiana, but still certainly one that I'm willing to get behind.
I remember a few weeks ago on our own program, we talked with Nicholas Meyer, And he made the comment that things that you get interested in when you're a child kind of stick with you forever. And I think when I was a kid, when I first heard about John Dillinger, and frankly, at that time, it was just like one step up from cowboys and Indians. It's cops and bank robbers. So that was probably a lot of the initial appeal. As I've gotten older, I find the 1930s and the gangster era really fascinating because it's a time in the country's history when everything is breaking down. A lot of people are under tremendous economic stress. We have the looming threat of war overseas. And it's really fascinating to me to see how different figures and how the system reacted to that stress. And while Dillinger certainly is responsible for a lot of violence and mayhem, he is probably among that particular group of gang robbers, the one that at least superficially seems to be the most charming and stylish.
Yes.
So maybe that's part of the appeal for us.
Oh.
Yeah, I joked to Kevin, and this is a terrible joke, so I apologize, but like he felt like the one who was like the influencer of the bank robbers, because I feel like Dillinger is the closest to the ideal bank robber that we all picture in our minds when we think like stylish men in suits shooting up a bank, but doing it cool in a cool way, and they're not really trying to hurt anyone. I mean, in fact, they did. But like that's what we think of. So he is the closest thing to that. Most of the other bank robbers of the time period, I would say, really fell short of that sort of ideal.
Oh, God. Well, first of all, you were speaking so much to my own heart on this. I am obsessed with the 1930s gangster stuff and history and Depression era history in general. Love the Prohibition, also studying Prohibition era. So yeah, the 20s and 30s and any of that sort of early 20th century. Kevin, you nailed that with, in conjunction with the Great Depression and the stressors that put on people. And also, I think this need for escape from their own problems. They would follow these news stories and see these bandits running around doing a lot of things that probably in the back of their minds, they were wishing like, God, that seems fun. So, and the media certainly seemed to thrive on that. But Dillinger, when I first entered the deep dive, because I always had the surface knowledge. I wrote a short story about John Dillinger, just using what I knew at the base level about him. I didn't know a lot of the other details that I've since learned. And I was curious, like how accurate the portrayal was of this kind of cool, collected, stylish bank robber who, by and large, I don't think at his core, he didn't seem like a murderer, violent type. He mostly seemed to hurt in response to being shot at, but it seemed like he preferred not to kill people, unlike his cohorts, like Harry Pierpont and Homer Van Meter and Babyface Nelson later on down the road, who was absolutely a bit of a psycho. He liked going into gunfights, whereas Dillinger seemed more into just buying nice cars and paying for his family's stuff and buying cars for his whole family and giving his girlfriend jewelry and fur coats and stuff. So it was interesting because he also seemed to avoid the organized crime aspect of things that were active. He didn't want to get in with the mob. He was more just, I just want to go into a bank and take what I want and go spend it. So it was kind of interesting to see that. But also I wanted to ask you too, living in Indiana, you know how like if you visit Chicago, Al Capone is everywhere in Chicago. You could get his face on a sweatshirt or a coffee mug. There's landmarks all over the place. Do you notice any of that around like say Indianapolis, or are you familiar with Mooresville or any of those areas?
Yeah, I can start in Mooresville. So Dillinger's born in Indianapolis and then it spends a lot of time growing up in Mooresville. Mooresville is actually a town where we looked into a cold case that's associated with that. And we ended up getting yelled at in Mooresville, rightfully so, because we wandered onto a man's property without meaning to, as we were sort of searching for this kind of wilderness thing where a body was found that we wanted to look into. So Mooresville, my picture of it is it's kind of on the rural side of suburban. There's more suburban elements to it. And then there are also more of this kind of like just this rambling creek we were trying to find, and, hunting blinds up. And it's a place that I would say is, it's quiet even today. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
And so Mooresville, and back then you can imagine it's even more farmland, right?
Right.
And Dillinger, is being raised there. He's a teenager there, but he's still getting into trouble in Mooresville and managing to find those issues. And at some point in his like early criminal career, he even does a violent robbery in Mooresville of a grocery store where he injures somebody. But what's wild is that his dad was a grocer, and his dad was kind of hard on him. So you kind of wonder, like, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into that, but it's interesting.
I don't think you are, actually.
Yeah. In terms of Indianapolis, there's not so much stuff that's like right out there and necessarily easy to find, but there are all sorts of things that are just in the background. There is just outside of downtown Indianapolis, for instance, there's a food court that sometimes we visit because I like the fish sandwiches there. And across the street, there are some buildings, and one of them kind of is like a little bit of an older style than the rest, and had like some sort of plaque in front of it. And we walked over there, and that was a bank that John Dillinger had robbed. It's no longer a bank now; it's just an empty building. But there are little reminders like that all over the place, I'd say.
Yeah, there's no like Al Capone-esque industry like Chicago has with Dillinger, but there's little things here and there, and certainly a lot of local authors are interested in Dillinger, and maybe it's a little bit more under the surface, though. You have to look for it.
Yeah, I noticed too, because he covered a lot of ground here in Ohio as well, and so that gave me a lot of opportunities to go and look at some local ish landmarks. I live about 90 minutes from Lima, Ohio, which is where he was held in jail, and he was busted out by his gang. And they have a museum in Allen County that you can go, and they have an exhibit of holding the actual jail cell he was held in, the desk that Sheriff Jess Sarber sat at, his revolver, which was actually stolen by Harry Pierpont and then recovered in Tucson. And there were a lot of other little artifacts, like letters that he had written to a girlfriend in Dayton, where I live. And there were just so many other little tiny things. And so I only discovered that because I had to directly look for it. I was like, is there anything in Lima to mark this? And so you find those little alcoves and things, but you're right. I don't notice an industry around Dillinger, which is so insane to me because of this man's celebrity at the time. He was huge in the media. He dominated the media at the time. People were obsessed with this guy. He was on all the newsreels and everything. And now in 2024, nearly a century after his death, it is just, it's for nerds only. It's like, which is also interesting considering his influence on how the FBI grew into what it is today as a direct result of his gang's activities and the other gangs. Of course, there were several, active gangs at the time. But it's interesting to see that he doesn't have that same sort of, like, if you put his face on a t-shirt, I don't know that I would obviously know exactly what that was. And if I saw you wearing the shirt that Anya is now wearing, she's wearing a John Dillinger shirt for people who can't see. And I would be like, oh my God, can I be your friend? But Al Capone, everybody knows Al Capone's face. So it is interesting to see now how that's filtered down. So I almost feel like a hipster, like, yeah, Capone is fine. But did you know that Dillinger was really the first public enemy #1 of the FBI, but
Allison, can you name the 3 of his top crimes?
right. Exactly. I mean, seriously, it is honestly like, it's interesting among like the historical fans, especially, to see like, okay, who's your favorite? And then people will ask me too, by the way, like, who's your favorite, like, past crime or vintage villain or whatever. And I'm just like, whoever I'm studying at the moment, that's who I'm obsessed with right now. But Kevin, I know we had spoken before about this, but there was a Dillinger museum, or there is a Dillinger museum in Indiana. And the book that I used as a source, the Dairy Matera book as a main source for the series, he got a lot of the information for that book from a cache of research that the owner of that museum had collected over a number of years that didn't end up being used because, well, he died rather mysteriously, right?
Yes. This museum, I don't think any iteration of it currently exists. I could be mistaken on that. This was a museum for some reason that was located in an old house in Nashville, Indiana. And I'm not sure there's any connection between John Dillinger and Nashville, Indiana. And by a bizarre coincidence, this house that this museum was located in was the home where my grandfather was born. So
wow.
That's odd.
Wow. Okay. That's fascinating.
So that's odd.
Yeah.
And also this museum, I wish it still existed, because sometimes when I try to tell people about it, it sounds like I'm making it up or I had a really bad dream. When you think of museums now, you think of very professionally done, curated things. This one had very unique personal items. It had a couple of cool items. It had the wooden gun that Dillinger allegedly used to break out of Crown Point jail, but also just had like old clippings from newspapers under glass. And then like next to them would be note cards on which this man, Mr. Joseph Pinkston, had typed different bits of information. And then there was like a sign that said, "Oh, enter this room, only, be aware, it's pretty bad." And you go in there, and there on a slab is a life-size wax figure of the bloody body of John Dillinger.
Wow.
And then you look around, and right next to it, for some reason, is a life-size wax figure of a very anguished-looking Bruno Hauptmann being electrocuted in the electric chair, which, again, has no discernible connection to John Dillinger.
Yeah, he was alleged to have kidnapped Charles Lindbergh's son, correct?
Nothing to do with John Dillinger. So
why not?
I'm not sure I should have been seeing this as a kid.
Yeah.
But I did. And then there was like a gift shop where they sold things like John Dillinger t-shirts. They sold some, frankly, irresponsible John Dillinger books like the Dillinger Dossier.
Oh, yeah.
They sold, for some reason, they sold this book about Bonnie and Clyde that had on the front cover pictures of the bloody bodies of Bonnie and Clyde. So again, I don't think I, as a kid, probably should have been exposed to this.
Oh my
but
goodness.
It's probably why I'm here today.
They did seem back in that time period to be a lot less scandalized about seeing the dead bodies of dead criminal. I mean, in my research in several cases, seeing things that I wouldn't expect to see on a general Google search, in terms of the dead. And I mean, people would turn a lot of this stuff into tourist attractions and things and try to collect artifacts from it. And I learned that from the Bell Gunnis case and another Indiana case. I love living next door to Indiana because I can sort of it just feels like home to me. Ohio and Indiana just feel like twins to me in a lot of ways. I went driving up in the northwestern quadrant of Ohio relatively recently, and there's literally nothing there but farmland. It looks exactly as it would have looked in Dillinger's time. And you can just imagine them going along all those cat roads, as they called them, these roads that are still only designated by letter. They don't have names, that's how rural a lot of this is. So I love that we can sort of imagine, since we're sitting in a very similar part of the country and that these people traveled in, and we don't have to go far to feel like we're back in there still, which is kind of interesting. But I know I'm rambling like crazy, but we talked about, you brought it up with the book, the Dillinger Dossier by J. Robert Nash, he's an interesting guy. He to say the least, he sued Wikipedia for using or referring to some of his material. I think it was, he doesn't like when people use his theories in their own stuff, which apparently he could probably sue me for writing a short story based on his theory. I don't know if I want to put that out in the world yet. But he is the one who pretty much came up with the theory, and this book was released in 1983, I believe, that stated that Dillinger had hired a body double named Jimmy Lawrence to basically die in his stead that night in front of the Biograph in Chicago, which to me just sounds completely bonkers. But there were things being used to support this theory, and that the guy the dead body in front of the Biograph didn't look a lot like John Dillinger. But of course, he had just had his face reconstructed 6 weeks prior to his death. So he wasn't going to look like the guy we were seeing in the mugshots anyway. Is there anything else I'm missing from that theory? It's just, that's the most prevailing one, that he lived out his days in California, never to be heard from again.
Do you love old Hollywood? The iconic movie stars at the center of all the glitz and glamour of Hollywood's golden age? Join me every Tuesday as I do a deep dive into some of old Hollywood's biggest names, as well as some not-so-big names. My primary focus is on the years leading up to stardom and the subsequent lives behind the scenes. Listen now to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. New shows every Tuesday. Listen now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or Amazon Music. Please join me and we can learn about these icons together.
That's basically it. He embellishes it with all of these like colorful details. I think he says that at some point the real Dillinger or someone connected to the real Dillinger sends some sort of a communication to Melvin Purvis, and Melvin Purvis like immediately hangs his head and goes in the other room and shoots himself.
Oh my God. I did not know that those two events were alleged being connected as well. Oh my God.
And that's an insult to Purvis. That's not how Purvis died.
No. And yeah,
well, clear that he intended anything that some people do think that was an accidental death.
Right. Yeah. The death of Purvis is the life of Purvis was equally fascinating. And I just find it interesting that they try to connect those two events together, because that sounds like a fiction story. It just sounds like, as a fiction writer, that's what I would have come up with to try to sell it. Or maybe I would have tried to come up with something a little better. But I mean, it just, it's just, the whole idea of the person just going away forever, to me, I know that Dillinger had expressed a desire in life to eventually get out of what he was doing and settle down, ostensibly with Billy Frechette, to live normally. But the problem with that, in my opinion, is that Dillinger loved money too much. He blew through it like water. He wouldn't have been able to hang on to a nest egg long enough, let alone at some point, I think he would have had to turn back to an illegitimate way of life, because he was also very bored by normal work. He couldn't hold a job very long. He just wasn't cut out for the normal lifestyle in a lot of ways. So I think we're all in agreement. Yeah, that theory is kind of.
Yeah. And then there's the fact that, the fingerprints of the body were taken and they were Dillinger's, and his relatives identified the body
by scars, I believe, on his leg. His sister knew of a scar on his leg, and that was there. And honestly, if you look at the pictures of his corpse, it looks like John Dillinger, even with the modifications that he'd had. You can see the shape of his face is the same. That just in general, I don't think it was a stretch when you look at him to believe that, that's Dillinger, just with his face cut up a little bit. But there were other myths as well. I've heard some people state, for instance, that the wooden gun was a myth. the gun that he carved to break out of Crown Point. But the problem with that being that gun was kind of everywhere in the media at the time. And they have the copy of it, and it was referred to in newspapers at the time. Yeah. Have you heard about people saying that Louis Paquette, his attorney, might have smuggled a gun into the jail for him? I don't know.
The thing I've heard offered as a possibility, and I'm not vouching for this, is there's something that might be plausible, is that Dillinger may not have carved the gun himself. He may not have had that ability, and perhaps someone like Louis Paquette may have smuggled in that wooden gun.
I see.
I don't know if that's true. I've heard that as a possibility. I've heard that a real gun was smuggled in. That doesn't seem to make sense.
No.
I don't think that would work.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean, there is a wooden gun on display somewhere, and I think it is fascinating, really, the method that Dillinger used to escape from that jail, apart from the wooden gun, was really just the way he casually walked Sam Cahoon and Blanc, I think, Ernest Blanc, to essentially, lure people like guards and trustees into his vicinity and then lock them up in cells. And it was very methodical. He didn't seem ruffled as he was making that jail escape, which just fascinates me as well. And just shows, I think, the cool that, and I don't mean cool as in what a cool dude. I just mean the temperature he operated at. Yeah. He wasn't a hothead. He took his time usually. And
I don't know where that wooden gun is now, but it certainly used to be a part of that Joseph Pinkston collection, because I saw it when it was on display at the museum years and years ago.
Yeah, I think I had heard there was a new Dillinger exhibit going up at the Mob Museum out in Las Vegas that is coming soon. Somebody tagged me in it. I will have to see if some of those artifacts might be among that. I need to get out to Vegas. But there was also the theory, there is a theory that, and the FBI, of course, in their own accounting discredits this, because it frankly is to their advantage. But a lot of people believe that Dillinger didn't have a gun on him or wasn't trying to pull a gun the night that he was shot. And he was shot from behind that night in front of the biograph. So there's always some back and forth on that. But I find it hard to believe that Dillinger wouldn't have had a gun on him at any time. He was a wanted man. He was a hunted man. So do you tend to feel like the official story of they saw him going for a gun and fired tends to be the more reasonable explanation of what happened?
Yeah, for me, and listen, I think it is absolutely reasonable to look at the FBI, especially early FBI, with a bit of a side eye and scrutinizing that, because there were definitely things that were done that were very sketchy. But I would say, when we look at just who Dillinger was, and as you said, the context of this interaction, do I see Dillinger just saying, actually, I just want to enjoy the movie? No, he's going to be armed, and is he going to get into a shootout? He had a history of participating in these violent robberies and shootouts, and even if we can look at him with a sympathetic view and say, well, maybe he was one of the ones that didn't necessarily want people to get hurt. It's not like when there were shootouts that he was involved in, he stood up and said, I don't want to be involved in this. Get me out of here. This is I think it's reasonable to assume that he was armed. The official story is that a Colt automatic was found, and that, he would have shot it out with them. So I don't really see much of a reason to discount that. What do you think?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I feel the same. It was no secret between the Chicago police, the Indiana police, and the FBI that, especially the Chicago police, they really were happy to just shoot him on sight if they saw him, and I know there's also been some back and forth about whether it was the FBI that fired the shot or Chicago PD, because they were also there that night. And I believe the FBI has taken credit for firing the deadly bullet, and still continues to.
And, and with the, it is important to remember Dillinger himself is believed to have been, the one who killed Patrolman William Patrick O'Malley.
Yes.
In Chicago. So he had already killed a law enforcement officer. And that's why I think it's always important to like, we can say he's stylish and interesting, but he killed somebody. That guy had daughters. I mean, like, was a real human being that he killed. And so I think it would make sense that the law enforcement response would be pretty heavy because he'd already killed one of them.
Exactly. I mean, they definitely saw too that he was unstoppable in a lot of ways. He broke out of 2 jails. He would have probably broken out of another one at some point. He just he was slippery to hang on to. So I think it was Captain John Steig, who was ahead of a sort of a roving Dillinger squad in Chicago, who was quoted as saying, if we can't keep him in jail, then there's no real point in arresting him. They were pretty publicly speaking about, how, he was a dead man walking, essentially. Yeah. So I felt like there's always like a public sympathy factor with Dillinger among the populace, sort of thing that saw him as this folk hero, Robin Hood type character, even though he was enriching himself more than the poor, that, they were going to have some sympathies with him over these sort of like federal police that everybody was very suspicious of at the time. And of course,
the guy's trying to watch a movie with his girl, there's something a little bit brutal about it, right? Where it's like, he didn't really, you almost feel like he didn't really have the chance to fight back. So I can understand.
Right. And he was turned in by a friend, Anna Sage there. It's interesting, she rats him out. And then she doesn't get the deal because she was a Romanian madam and trying to avoid deportation, and they deported her anyway. And I guess she didn't get any of the reward money. Purvis, I think, went to bat trying to make that happen, but Hoover was like, "Oh, that's not our problem. That's a State Department issue now. Bye." But yeah, and it's unfortunate too, the stuff with Melvin Purvis that happened after the aftermath of this, because he got a lot of celebrity nabbing, not only Dillinger getting a lot of credit for that anyway, but also Pretty Boy Floyd was another, gangster that I think he was part of the team that took Pretty Boy Floyd down that November. But after that, it seems like he fell out of favor with Hoover, and he left the FBI in 1935, roughly about a year after Dillinger's death. Went on to do some pretty crazy, awesome stuff in some ways. He worked in Hollywood. He started a radio station, a newspaper. He, was involved in the Nuremberg trials, World War II. He was a Nazi hunter. He ensured the demotion of General Patton, this legendary war general who was apparently slapping his soldiers who were suffering from PTSD. He was part of that whole investigation to take him down. So he does all this. And then around age 6 in 1960, he shoots himself with a service revolver that was was presented to him from the FBI as like a gift. I think it was. Yeah. A lot of people, I think the FBI tried to pinpoint it as a suicide, but it seems like it was possibly an accidental thing. It's interesting though. I mean, I when I look back through his life, I don't get the sense of a man that would take his own life like that, but who knows? You can't get into the mind of somebody like that in that moment. But where do you tend to fall on the Purvis death?
At first, I was pretty convinced it was a suicide because I know he had gotten recent diagnoses regarding his health. Mm-hmm. And when I, reading more about him, again, as you said, we cannot know. And oftentimes suicides are an impulsive act that don't necessarily have a lot of foreplanning. So I don't discount that. But he had recently been in very good spirits and had been talking to people about stuff he was looking forward to and, fighting his health issues. And I think it's possible. It's certainly maybe what I lean toward, that he was this was an accident when he was cleaning his gun or doing something. Yeah. Which also, can happen even to somebody who's adept at handling firearms. Mistakes happen, and sometimes when it's a deadly weapon, they can be fatal mistakes.
Yeah, big point.
Yeah. I would love to have spent more time on Purvis in my series. I tried to, whittle it down to like a lot of the important points, but a fascinating figure. I mean, he did some things that were questionable in terms of method. And then there was the whole mock trial controversy of a black man named John Kelly from Philadelphia, who had provided, I guess, a tip that Dillinger was sighted out there. They brought him out to Chicago and set up a false trial, made him believe that he was on trial in the interrogation to get him to spill any details that he was holding on to. And then when the ruse fell apart and John Kelly goes and talks to the press, Purvis is like, what? I didn't know that there wasn't a mock trial. I mean, that's just one of a few tactics, I guess. And then he has ties to Hermann Goering, the Nazi head of the Gestapo. I mean,
isn't that insane? Like, it just, like, you write fiction, doesn't it? Like, if I sent you my novel where that was happening, like, oh, this top G-man is, like, friends with the Nazis, but then, like, goes and helps prosecute them, wouldn't you be like, this is kind of hacky on you? Like, what the heck is this?
And the wild thing, too, with the whole, like, I guess in his last conversation with Goering, he asked, can I avoid being hanged? And Purvis was like, no. And then that night, he swallows a cyanide pill in his jail cell. And it's like, where did he get that? Nobody seems to answer that question. That was like my first question. Like, where did he get the cyanide pill? Did Purvis help him out? I don't know. But it's just, again, it's like you said, if this were a fiction novel, I would go, we need to cut back a little bit on this guy.
Do less.
Exactly. I was like, this guy's life does read like something out of a comic book or something. It's larger than life. So yeah, Purvis was a fascinating figure unto himself, that really, the book Public Enemies by Brian Burrow will give you a good picture of like following Purvis's movements through the course of the Dillinger case. Just don't pay attention to the movie. It is like 999% fiction. I was watching it last night, actually, in preparation for our discussion. And I was just like, holy crap, this is all wrong. And I was driving my husband insane. I'm like, that didn't happen. That couldn't have happened. The FBI was not involved at this point. It's like, why did they mix up the timeline? I was being awful. So jumping now ahead to the, as we've talked about the body doubles and, the myths around Dillinger's death, this conversation is still active enough that as of 2019, the remaining family members of Dillinger were attempting to have the body in Indiana exhumed. Was it Crown Point Cemetery? I think it was.
Crown Hill.
Crown Hill, that's right. And the cemetery actually said, no, you're not going to do that. Apparently, they are allowed to stop exhumations, even ones that have been approved judicially. They're allowed to just be like, no, you can't come into our cemetery and disturb possibly other graves and whatnot.
Because one of the issues is that Dillinger's tomb, for lack of a better word, at least according to press reports, there's concrete and stuff underneath there to protect it from possible grave robbers. And so it's difficult to imagine how you could extract that coffin without doing considerable damage to surrounding grave sites.
Yes.
And the cemetery also, I thought, made an interesting point, which is that you need to have the permission of a family member to dig up a body. You can't just go around and say, oh, let's dig up Joe Smith and see if the gravestone is accurate. You need a family member. And there's no reason to believe that Jimmy Lawrence is buried there.
Right.
There's every reason to believe it's John Dillinger. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say maybe they're right, and maybe it is another person. And that person's family has not consented to his body being dug up.
Right.
So if the cemetery allows that to happen, that person's family would be able to sue the cemetery.
Oh, wow.
So for that and some other reasons, the Crown Hill said, we're not going to do this unless there's like a formal court order. And there's nothing in the Indiana statute that says, well, yeah, if you want to dig up a body just to see who it is, go ahead. There's nothing in the law that allows that. So because of Crown Hill's, I think, reasonable opposition, and because there's no real law designed to deal with this situation, and also the fact, frankly, there's no reason not to believe that that's John Dillinger. It seems to be pretty permanently stalled.
I just want to add to this because I remember, so I went to college in Virginia near Colonial Williamsburg, and the church there, Bruton Parish Church, really pretty, has like a cool cemetery right there. But like they had a similar situation where I think at one point a cult from New Mexico was like searching for Sir Francis Bacon's secret writings to prove that he was really Shakespeare.
Whoa.
And then maybe some other people, I don't know, I don't want to label everyone as the cult members. I think there may have been also some interested people who might have wanted, maybe Francis Bacon's letters are here. And, I think they ended up digging in some places in Bruton Parish, and they found nothing. And it's just like, like people with sort of half-baked theory, and basically I feel like running on vibes more than anything else of like, wouldn't this be cool? Doesn't mean you can just dig up bodies.
I'm interested in the Kennedy assassination, John F. Kennedy assassination.
Same. We need to hang out more.
Yes.
I think it was in the early 80s. There was a theory that Lee Harvey Oswald was not buried in his grave. That was actually a Russian agent.
Oh, God.
And so they dug up Lee Harvey Oswald. And spoiler alert, I hope you're sitting down, it was Lee Harvey Oswald.
What?
A lot of this stuff just, yeah.
It's just
I mean, the 12-year-old kid in me thinks, yeah, it'd be cool. But there's all of these complications, and it would just be an enormous waste of time and effort.
Everybody trying to look like Geraldo opening the Al Capone vaults.
Yeah, and we all know how well that went.
This was purportedly going to be done because the History Channel wanted to make a documentary about digging up this guy's grave. So that also makes it seem a bit Geraldo Rivera-ish.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think people ultimately they have a hard time kind of closing the door on a story. If it doesn't fit a certain parameter of, I don't know, just intrigue and fantastical whatnot, like with the Kennedy assassination and so many other stories that so many myths and legends pop up around and everything. And ultimately, though, I think the Dillinger story, after just pouring through it for weeks on end and doing so much reading and just becoming, frankly, quite obsessed with this case, I just cannot see that this isn't Dillinger. I invite anybody, if you haven't, hopefully you've listened to the 4 previous episodes I've done on this, and you've listened to so many other people that have done even better work on this case, that hopefully you come away feeling like the myth is a myth. And really, and finally, I would love to talk to you about just in general, like, did you get a similar sense in studying this that, I don't know, where would we be right now with a law enforcement apparatus in this country without these Depression era outlaws? It's a fascinating time, and I keep trying to put together in my head what influenced what here. Was it the Depression and economic status that influenced the outlaws to do what they did, that then built the police up to be what it is today? I'm trying to just make sense of it all, and I'm honestly curious at your thoughts on that, because as I'm reading Dillinger's story, I am just going, here's the birth of the FBI, like that we understand today. We look at the failures of what they've gone through at Little Bohemia and that whole debacle and everything, but Hoover got the funding on the basis of that. Indiana State Police Captain Matt Leach, who is a huge character in this story of Dillinger, by the way, but gets completely left out of the telling, like the mainstream tellings of it. Matt Leach deserves, again, his own whole episode because he's a fascinating guy. He hunted Pancho Villa. I mean, this guy, again, these characters in this story are amazing. But anyway, back to the point. I'm just saying, like, do you feel like without these outlaws, like, what would have grown our law enforcement to be what it is now? Because I just feel like it would be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this, and then the Charles Lindbergh, kidnapping, very important moments for the FBI. I mean, like, one thing people may not understand about J. Edgar Hoover is, like, I feel, I'm going to use the term, like, he almost feels like a master marketer. Like he was able to take situations and be like, okay, I'm going to use this to my advantage and accrue power. Like, every situation feels like it was an opportunity for him to accrue personal power, but also more power for the FBI, which is, of course, like, in the beginning, before he took it over, it's just a nothing entity.
Right.
And he's just kind of almost gathering all his forces over time. And I think the bank robbers, the John Dillingers, were a big part of that. And I think Brian Burroughs in his book, kind of a bit of a thesis that's developed over time has been that, like, the FBI may have, gussied up these kind of common criminals a little bit and put them out to the media, like, oh, it's not just some jerk who's going around robbing banks. It's Pretty Boy Floyd. Ooh, and then that makes them look cooler when they bust him eventually. It's like, you have to have a good, Sherlock Holmes is great, but you want to have the Moriarty to go up against, because then it's like, you want to have that excellent antagonist to really kind of bolster public opinion of you because you defeated them. And so I feel like it definitely played into Hoover's hands as far as the FBI, and of course, I guess the development of modern day law enforcement as a whole.
And you could even argue that Hoover did something similar in later decades. I think many people feel that he exaggerated the danger of the Communist Party of the United States in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. And one reason to do that was to generate, well, the communists are so dangerous, you need to give us more funding. I think I read somewhere that one of the major sources of the United States Communist Party were like membership dues paid by FBI informants because they would monitor the meetings. And meanwhile, he's so focused on that, he lets organized crime go.
He's acting like, at a very late date, he's acting like mafia. What mafia? That sounds like a myth.
See, I think he's a very good marketer.
Yeah, he's a genius at marketing. Very problematic figure, obviously, and did a lot of very sketchy things. But I think
a lot of terrible things.
Did a lot of very terrible things.
He's definitely going to be a feature on my show. Like, I'm doing a series on him.
Yeah, he deserves his own series. He's wild, but but certainly when it, maybe not a genius for crime solving, but a genius for accruing power, which is not good, obviously. And the fact that, like, he got to the point where presidents could not dislodge him. Like, everyone was like, we know this is a problem, but if we poke that bear, he is going to bury us. And
like any marketer, he's really aware of the importance of portrayal in the media, even in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Aine and I often talk about, there's this bizarre movie called The FBI Story, which was...
Have you ever seen this, Allison? Have you ever seen The FBI Story with Jimmy Stewart?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God. Okay. Please watch that for your J. Edgar Hoover. It is the most insane, like, you're thinking right now as a normal person, okay, FBI agent played by Jimmy Stewart, kind of all-American guy doing some stories based off of real cases. That sounds pretty good, right? No, it's like this bizarre, like, carousel where he's just going around, and the framing narrative is like he's giving a speech to FBI agents. It's a very weird movie.
It's basically interesting as a glimpse into, this is what J. Edgar Hoover wanted us to think of as the FBI and how it operates.
So it was like a propaganda film, right?
Yeah.
I think it's like 2.5, 3 hours long.
It's like 3 hours long.
Whoa.
We had to break it up. We couldn't do it in one set. We were just like, this is getting...
It covers gangsters. It covers communists.
The Flower Moon. They're talking about the Osage murders.
Incredible.
You're going into South America at one point?
But J. Edgar Hoover is involved in the production of it, and I think isn't even portrayed in Shadows at one point.
He's portrayed in Shadows at one point, like, hey guys, I'm the new director, and we're gonna turn things around now. And they're all like,
when did Hoover leave or die? Like, when was he done? Yeah.
He didn't leave. He's not.
He's still there. Like, really, his fingerprints are still all over. Like, when I read the FBI's own accounts of the Dillinger story, you can see so much of the influence that Hoover put on the narrative, even now, especially when, like, Purvis is barely even mentioned because he hated Purvis by the end. He wanted Purvis out of there. and tried to wipe him from the record. I mean, he's very much there still, but I mean,
damnatio memoriae, right? When like the ancient Romans would like
die like in maybe 72?
72. And then it was interesting because he died and then Watergate happened.
Yeah.
Because the idea might be that like if Nixon had been, if they'd caught that early, maybe it wouldn't have gone down the way it would have because like the FBI was ultimately, people often credit the press, and obviously the press played a very important role in exposing Watergate to the public, but the investigation was the FBI.
Right.
And Woodward and Bernstein's source is an FBI agent named Mark Felt.
Oh, Deep Throat.
Deep Throat.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons why he may have been leaking to the press was because he was in kind of an internal politics within the FBI because of the power vacuum that had opened up after the death of J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, he was a Hoover loyalist, right?
I think so.
Yeah, he was a Hoover loyalist. So people kind of often are like, that's a very heroic thing. But he had his own reasons for doing it.
But now we're like 40 years past the death of Dillinger.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're like, sorry.
No, seriously, it's amazing how one thing leads to another, though. I mean, that's really the fascination of the Dillinger case for me, is just seeing all the doors that it opens beyond Dillinger himself, who really probably never imagined he would have the impact that he had. Even this was a guy who just wanted to do some robbing, buy some nice shirts.
You can also argue that Dillinger in this era helped fuel the rise of true crime.
Yeah,
because there were like radio shows about true crime. Lots of great true crime magazines started coming out to chronicle all of this. So
and even Dillinger's family, they were offered, and I don't know if they accepted, but they were offered to go on the vaudeville circuit and tell their story. They were offered all kinds of money to be in different sideshows and things, and so it commercialized the coverage of crime. I mean, the press just they had a love affair with a lot of these guys. And that it really kept the people interested and the eyes on the pages. And I would agree with that 100%. So,
like, I'm going to say this, like, I have a lot of problems with modern day true crime, but I think there are people who are trying to do it sensitively and do it right and do it accurately. But if you look at true crime back then, it's just, you were saying this, like some of the salaciousness and some of the wildness. Mm-hmm. And you really do feel like there is that affection and love for some of these bank robbers. And it's just funny. Like, I just think of that, like, meme from Keeping Up with the Kardashians, like, Kim, there's people dying, like they're shooting people. They're like, they've murdered some people, but like the way they write about them, it's like modern day Robin Hoods, even though, as you pointed out aptly, this is not a situation where there's like class solidarity where it's like, oh, we're going to give money back to the people. I mean, that would have been actually kind of awesome, I think.
Yeah, but they didn't more like they didn't do quite the Escobar, where they bought the town, bought the city and kind of whatever. But
they were just trying to enrich themselves, but I think they were acting out a fantasy a lot of people had. A lot of people were resentful of, like, losing everything, striking back. So they represented, I think, like a bit of hope for a lot of people. So I understand that.
Yeah, I don't think that we would see that nearly today. A figure like Dillinger probably wouldn't even really crack too much of the national press unless he did start, going from corner to corner of the country and terrorizing people. But I feel like our institutions and such are so well guarded now and so huge and monolithic in so many ways that I think it's just a lot of these guys got away with what they did specifically because you couldn't do things like background checks, and there weren't photos on driver's licenses, and there weren't computers and two-way radios, and our technology really sped up to catch up with the class of criminal, but they sort of had the lead out the gate. So.
And I'm going to say this, like, you at the top, you talked about Al Capone. Why is he so huge? Why is Dillinger not as huge? I think that may be part of it, because we all know, I mean, I think the mafia in some ways has been reduced in its power, but organized crime is certainly still very much alive and well. And Al Capone represents that. But nowadays, if someone robs a bank, it's probably not going to go that well for them pretty quickly. And it's certainly not going to look glamorous. It's just going to be a guy with a gun screaming and, like, some local credit unions. It's just not,
it doesn't have the glamour associated.
Anymore.
You're not going to get a dude in a trench coat and a fedora leaping over a gate to, stick a Tommy gun in your face. I mean, what has happened to this world? It's just,
I know, right? Bring back the glamour.
Make bank robbing great again.
Oh no.
No.
Alice,
hey, I'm
don't do it, Allison.
Oh my God. I could honestly talk to you guys for so much longer than this. I'm just so glad you carved out, this little bit of time for me amid all the prep you were doing for Delphi right now. And and as of this recording is starting next week. So, Kevin and Aine, would you please come back on my show again sometime to talk crime with me?
Oh my God, yes. You're like so our person, and we really appreciate you and just love the work you do. So we would love that. I love your approach to crime. I do want to say we have to say something because we set it up. So the guy with the Dillinger Museum died mysteriously.
Yes.
And you want to mention that really quickly?
Well, very quickly, he died of a gunshot wound, and they said the official verdict is suicide. But when you talk to people locally, they always act as if, Kevin, actually, there was a lot of hidden stuff going on there, and it was actually murder.
Oh.
And I've heard this from like 5 or 6 different people. I've heard this from, I won't name the person, but I've heard that it was murder from a prominent true crime writer.
Whoa.
But whenever I push for details, everybody just clams up. So I think if anyone out there has information, they should either send it to you or to us.
Yep.
I would love to find out whether this was murder or suicide.
Give us
special investigation on the scene, guys. I don't live far from you. We can make this work.
Yeah.
We can do this.
We'll get feet on the ground and go do some sleuthing. I think that would be amazing. So, all right, you guys. Well, thank you again so very much. I appreciate your time, and we will talk again very soon, I hope.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Allison.
All right. Take care. I want to thank Kevin and Aine again for what I hope to be the first of many discussions on historical true crime and really anything else that comes to mind. They were so easy to talk to, and I could have pretty much talked to them for hours and hours. Again, check out the Murder Sheet podcast if you haven't already. And if you have any questions for me, shoot me an email at vintagevillainspod@gmail.com or stop by the Facebook group, the Vintage Villain Soiree, and start a discussion on Dillinger or whatever other historical topic strikes your fancy. I have another fun episode in the hopper for next week, so join me. In the meantime, get out there and make good history, and I'll see you next time in another century.